Muscle cars are supposed to be loud, fast, and mean, but these were just strange. From awkward designs to confusing performance choices, these 12 American muscle cars took a hard left turn into the bizarre. Were they bold experiments or total misfires? Either way, they left everyone wondering, how did this ever make it off the drawing board? In 1970, Ford Falcon 429 Cobra Jet, the muscle car that hid in plain sight. Every muscle car era has its stars, the flamboyant heroes that wore their horsepower like a badge of honor. Hemis with shaker hoods, Chevelles with cowl inductions, GTOs with judge decals and psychedelic paint. But behind the curtain of glory, there were a few quiet monsters. Cars that whispered instead of screamed. Cars that didn't look fast, until they were halfway through a quarter mile and already a few car lengths ahead. And at the very top of that hidden hierarchy sits one of the most mysterious, forgotten, and brutally capable sleepers of them all, the 1970 Ford Falcon 429 Cobra Jet. To understand why this car is so fascinating, you have to look at where it came from and what it wasn't supposed to be. By 1970, the Falcon was no longer Ford's darling. It had been born in 1960 as a compact economy car, cheap and cheerful, but the introduction of the Mustang in 1964 knocked it off its pedestal. Ford tried to keep the Falcon relevant, gradually making it bigger, more squared off, and less charming. It shared much of its underpinnings with the Fairlane and later the Torino, but it had lost its purpose. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't sporty, and it wasn't selling. In 1970, the Falcon was being quietly pushed toward extinction. And that's exactly when Ford did something that made absolutely no sense on paper, but made all the sense in the world to performance purists. For a single model year, Ford allowed buyers to check an obscure combination on the order sheet: the 429 cubic-inch Cobra Jet V8 stuffed into a Falcon. No fanfare, no special trim name, no muscle car branding. Just one of the most potent engines of the era quietly inserted into one of the plainest bodies on any showroom floor. And the result? A legitimate street terror disguised as a commuter car. The 429 Cobra Jet wasn't some lazy Luxo barge engine. This was Ford's response to GM's big block dominance and Mopar's 446-pack madness. Officially rated at 370 horsepower, though anyone who's driven one will tell you that was an underrating, this engine delivered mountains of torque and was capable of launching the Falcon like a missile. Buyers who knew what to ask for could also spec the drag pack, which added a 430-1 rear end, engine oil cooler, and heavy-duty internals. With slicks and a good driver, it was easily a 13-second car out of the box. But here's the kicker. The Falcon looked like it had no business being fast. Most came with bench seats, column shifters, steel wheels, and vinyl interiors. The paint options were conservative, lots of browns, beiges, and olive greens. There were no hood scoops, no stripes, and certainly no badging that hinted at the storm beneath the hood. In fact, most people who saw one at a stoplight likely assumed it was a delivery car or something their neighbor's uncle drove to the hardware store on Saturdays. That made it perfect. In an era when insurance rates were killing the muscle car and every loud graphic meant a higher premium, the Stealth Falcon was a dream. It was a predator in librarian's glasses, the kind of car that could pull up next to a Camaro SS or a 383 Roadrunner and, without a single ounce of intimidation, leave them shaking their heads in the rearview mirror. A former street raider from Michigan once said of his 429 Falcon, "No one knew what it was. That was the point. I'd line up, dead stock outside, dog dish hubcaps and all, and the other guy would laugh. Until the light turned green, then all they saw was taillights and disbelief." Why didn't more people buy it? Because they didn't know it existed. Ford didn't advertise it. Dealers rarely ordered it. It wasn't featured in any brochures. And by 1971, it was gone. The Falcon name continued for another year in name only, as a base Torino, and the sleeper sedan with muscle car guts disappeared into the mist of muscle lore. Today, spotting a real 1970 Falcon with a factory-installed 429 Cobra jet is like finding buried treasure. Estimates suggest only a handful were made. Exact numbers are murky at best. Survivors are even rarer, often misidentified or assumed to be engine swaps. But for those who know what they're looking at, these cars are the ultimate unicorn. A legitimate factory big block sleeper, built at the peak of Detroit's performance madness and buried beneath a shell of pure anonymity. It's the muscle car equivalent of a secret handshake, one that few knew, fewer remember, and almost no one saw coming. And maybe that's why it's so perfect. 1906, Mercury Comet Cyclone GT, the muscle car with the opera name. In the world of muscle cars, names matter. Cyclone GT rings out with the kind of aggressive, high-performance energy that promises thunderous acceleration, brute force, and a spine-rattling exhaust note. When you hear the name, you expect something that looks like it was built for the racetrack. But imagine the surprise when you see the car that bears that name. A sleek, understated Mercury Comet with a formal roofline and a conservative design. It doesn't look like a muscle car. It looks more like a bank manager's daily driver or a family sedan than a car built to leave rubber on the pavement. And that was the genius and the irony of the 1966 Mercury Comet Cyclone GT. It was a muscle car wrapped in a suit of luxury, a true sleeper that hid its savage nature behind a polite and polished appearance. It all started in 1906 when Mercury decided to push its Comet series into the muscle car market. While competitors like Chevrolet and Pontiac were cranking out aggressive, in-your-face performance machines, Mercury took a different approach with the Cyclone GT. Instead of oversized fenders and hood scoops, the Cyclone GT looked like a stylish, upscale compact car. The Comet's elegant lines, formal roof, and chrome trim didn't scream performance. They whispered it. The intention was to appeal to buyers who wanted a fast car, but who also wanted the refined, dignified feel that Mercury was known for. Under the hood, however, the Cyclone GT was a different story. The car was equipped with a 390 cubic inch V8 that churned out 271 horsepower, a serious jump over the standard engine offerings of the day. With this engine, the Cyclone GT could go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 7.5 seconds, an impressive feat for a car that looked like it belonged in a more refined category. Paired with a floor-mounted 4-speed manual transmission, the car was ready to take on the muscle car competition. But where the Cyclone GT differed was in how it delivered that power. It wasn't brash, it wasn't in your face, it wasn't even trying to be anything other than what it was, a Mercury Comet with a performance heart. The big 390 V8 was tucked under the hood, barely noticeable unless you were willing to let the car stretch its legs and unleash the power. Owner's take. It was a real sleeper. It didn't have the aggressive styling of the Chevelle SS or the Mustang GT. It had the looks of a quiet, reserved car. But when I dropped the clutch, you could feel the power surge, and no one saw it coming. It was always a shock when I smoked them off the line. Unlike other muscle cars of the time, which made no effort to hide their performance intentions, the Comet Cyclone GT was subtle in its design. The formal roofline and luxury-inspired trim made it look more like a car built for comfort than speed. The car lacked the bold stripes, aggressive hoods, or muscle car posture of its contemporaries. Instead, it looked polished, almost posh. Yet beneath the quiet exterior, the Cyclone GT could deliver a level of performance that surprised and sometimes startled other drivers. It was a classic wolf in sheep's clothing, a muscle car that preferred to fly under the radar, only revealing its true nature when the time was right. Despite its impressive power and unique design, the Mercury Comet Cyclone GT never quite caught on with buyers. In a world dominated by cars like the Mustang, Camaro, and GTO, machines designed to scream muscle from every angle, the subtlety of the Cyclone GT made it a hard sell. Mercury had designed a car that was too refined for the die-hard performance crowd, but too loud for buyers who wanted a more reserved vehicle. The Cyclone GT was stuck between two worlds and never quite found a home in either. In 1966, fewer than 2,000 Cyclone GTs were sold, and by 1967, Mercury quietly discontinued the model, shifting its focus to other cars in the Comet lineup. The Cyclone GT was gone before it had the chance to make a true impact on the muscle car scene, and the unique combination of elegance and raw power was lost in the shuffle. Today, the 1966 Mercury Comet Cyclone GT is a rare sight, a true gem for collectors who appreciate the finer details and underappreciated history of muscle cars. Its understated style, combined with surprising performance, makes it a car that not only stands out, but remains a sleeper in the muscle car world. It may not have been the loudest or the most iconic muscle car of its time, but for those who appreciate the art of subtle performance, the Cyclone GT remains one of the most interesting and overlooked machines of the era. Owner's reflection. The best part of driving that car was the look on people's faces when they realized how fast it really was. They'd see the Comet badge, and then I'd hit the gas, and it was like watching their jaws drop. It was a muscle car for people who didn't want to make a scene. 1977 AMC Hornet AMX, when the AMX lost its edge. The AMC AMX was once a revered icon in the muscle car world, a powerful, compact beast that offered everything a car enthusiast could want: speed, aggression, and style. Born in 1968, the AMX quickly became known as AMC's answer to the muscle car market, a two-seater powerhouse with a purpose-built attitude. Its sleek design, fast V8 engine, and no-nonsense personality captured the hearts of those seeking something distinct from the conventional muscle car offerings of Ford and Chevy. However, by the mid-70s, the muscle car era had started its decline, and what was once a symbol of power was about to lose its way. Enter the 1907 AMC Hornet AMX, a strange and somewhat heartbreaking evolution of the AMX legacy. AMC, realizing that the muscle car market was shrinking rapidly due to the oil crisis, rising insurance premiums, and stricter emissions regulations, decided to slap the AMX name onto a far more pedestrian platform, the AMC Hornet. What was once a beast of a car had been transformed into an oddball compact with a vaguely muscle car look, but none of the bite. Gone were the raw, aggressive lines, the high-performance engines, and the performance pedigree. In its place was a car that could best be described as an imposter, a facade of muscle that lacked the substance to back it up. In nighttime, that muscle cars were no longer the youthful symbols of rebellion and raw power. Instead, they were relegated to a niche market, and buyers were looking for something more in line with the economic climate. AMC, never one to shy away from trying to remain relevant, tried to cling to the remnants of its muscle car glory days. They took the AMC Hornet, an already compact family-oriented car, and added some muscle car trimmings, such as aggressive stripes, spoilers, and occasionally a 304 V8 engine. But these cosmetic changes were little more than window dressing, and they couldn't hide the fact that this was far from a real muscle car. The 304 V8 engine, though a solid performer in many other applications, was no match for the high-revving engines that had defined the AMX. With only about 150 horsepower, the Hornet AMX was a far cry from the muscle car it was meant to evoke. It could manage respectable acceleration, but it wasn't the tire-smoking, power-packed machine the AMX badge had once promised. The car's handling, too, left much to be desired. The once prominent AMX badge now sat awkwardly on a car that didn't know whether it wanted to be a muscle car or a compact cruiser. It wasn't fast enough to be thrilling, and it certainly wasn't cool enough to command attention like its muscle car predecessors. The styling of the 1977 AMX was another issue. AMC slapped on some spoilers, decals, and a bold hood stripe, but they couldn't hide the fact that the Hornet was just a compact car with a performance look. The body lines were awkward, and the overall aesthetic screamed more budget car than performance machine. The AMX badge, which once symbolized wild speed and rebellion, had become little more than a hollow marketing tool. The AMX name had lost its power, and with it, the expectations that had once surrounded it. For buyers at the time, the AMX was a disappointment. Those who had followed the original AMX and had seen it as a powerful and rebellious machine found it hard to believe that this was the same nameplate. In 1908, the AMX was a game changer, quick, compact, and ready to take on the world. In 1907, it was a cheap performance version of a family car, and the magic had long since evaporated. Many buyers likely felt duped, purchasing a car based on the AMX name, only to find out that what they had wasn't the same animal at all. The 1907 Hornet AMX wasn't terrible by any means. The 304 V8 engine was a competent powertrain for what it was, and the car did offer some handling characteristics that were more in line with what you might expect from a sport compact. However, it couldn't live up to the legacy of the original AMX. The roar of the engine was muted, the acceleration was underwhelming, and the overall driving experience lacked the thrill and excitement of its muscle car predecessors. Disappointed owner. I bought it because of the AMX badge. I thought I was getting a piece of history, but what I got was just another compact with a lot of stickers and a little more power than usual. Sure, it looked the part, but when you pressed the pedal, the magic was gone. The engine didn't have that angry roar, and it just didn't feel fast. I stayed with it for a while because deep down, I wanted to love it, but every time I hit the gas, I remembered it wasn't what I'd hoped for. Today, the 1977 AMC Hornet AMX is seen as an automotive oddity, a rare, confused car in the midst of a disappearing muscle car era. It doesn't fit neatly into any category. It isn't a true muscle car, but it isn't just a regular compact either. 1975 Pontiac Ventura Sprint, the almost GTO nobody remembers. By the mid-1970s, the golden era of muscle cars was quickly fading. The days of roaring V8s, aggressive street machines, and cars that defined an entire generation of car culture were coming to an abrupt halt. New restrictions, rising insurance premiums, stricter emission standards, and the gas crisis had forced automakers to reevaluate what muscle meant in a rapidly changing world. Pontiac, a brand synonymous with performance thanks to its iconic GTO, was caught in a predicament. How could they keep the muscle car legacy alive when the landscape had shifted so drastically? The answer, it seemed, was the 1975 Pontiac Ventura Sprint. In essence, the Ventura Sprint was Pontiac's half-hearted attempt at holding on to the muscle car tradition while acknowledging that times had changed. It was a muscle car in name and appearance, but under the hood, it was far from the fire-breathing beasts of the 1960s and early 70s. With the GTO and Firebird increasingly relegated to the history books, Pontiac wanted to offer something that could maintain the spirit of performance without fully committing to the old-school muscle car formula. The Ventura Sprint was a package that could be added to the compact Pontiac Ventura, a car that wasn't originally designed with muscle in mind. With the Sprint package, Pontiac offered a few key styling tweaks, such as the hood scoop, rally wheels, and distinct Sprint decals that gave it the appearance of a performance car. But the visual upgrades were about all the car had going for it. Underneath, the Ventura Sprint was essentially a compact economy car dressed up to look like a muscle car. The real disappointment lay under the hood. For all the muscle car cues, the Ventura Sprint didn't have the engine to back it up. Pontiac offered a choice of V8 engines, with the largest being a 350 cubic inch V8, which was good for a modest 150 horsepower. While that may sound impressive on paper for a compact car, it was a far cry from the 400 and 455 cubic inch engines that defined the GTO and other classic muscle cars. This wasn't the kind of performance that could get your heart racing or make you feel the thunder of a true muscle car under acceleration. Instead, it was a car that looked the part but didn't have the heart. The marketing also played a role in the car's downfall. Pontiac was stuck in an awkward place. They tried to appeal to buyers who still longed for the muscle car era, but knew that a true muscle car wouldn't fly in the insurance climate of the mid-70s. The Ventura Sprint's identity was confused from the get-go. It had the styling of a performance car, but its lack of true power meant it could never quite live up to those expectations. The Sprint was caught between two worlds, the world of budget compact sedans and the world of high-performance muscle cars, yet it didn't truly excel in either. Sales were predictably underwhelming. The Ventura Sprint couldn't capture the imagination of muscle car enthusiasts who had already seen the death of the true muscle car era. It also didn't resonate with those looking for a more practical, economy-focused car. As a result, fewer than 4,000 Ventura Sprints were produced in 1975, making it a rare and largely forgotten oddity. Pontiac was forced to discontinue the Sprint package after just 1 year, And with it went the final remnants of the brand's muscle car ambitions for that generation. What's fascinating about the Ventura Sprint, though, is how it symbolized the end of an era. By the time it was introduced, muscle cars were rapidly becoming a relic of the past. The Ventura Sprint was like a fading echo of a time when cars were built to thrill. But in 1970, with its slightly confused identity and weak performance, it couldn't quite capture the magic of its forebears. It's as if Pontiac had made one last desperate attempt to keep the dream alive before accepting that the times had changed. Unfortunately, the Ventura Sprint wasn't the car to do it. Fast forward to today, and the 1975 Pontiac Ventura Sprint is a car few even remember. It's one of those forgotten relics of the muscle car era, like a shadow of the glory days that never quite made it. While cars like the GTO, Chevelle, and Camaro live on as icons, the Ventura Sprint is left as a curious footnote. It's a car that was supposed to embody the spirit of muscle, but ultimately became a misstep in Pontiac's long history. For those lucky enough to have experienced it, the Ventura Sprint was a reminder of what could have been. For everyone else, it's just another forgotten relic from an era that was slipping away. Former driver. I told people it was a GTO, then I got embarrassed and said it was just a Pontiac. You know, it had the look of a muscle car, but you could tell it wasn't the real deal. I loved it for what it was, but there was always that feeling it just wasn't good enough. The 1970 Chrysler 300 Hurst, the full-size muscle yacht. The 1970 Chrysler 300 Hurst is one of those cars that doesn't make a lot of sense on paper, but when you see it, you know it has to exist. Picture a land yacht, a car so big it could have its own zip code, and then toss in a 440 cubic inch V8, a fiberglass hood scoop, and a paint job so gold it could blind you. Oh, and let's not forget the Hurst badging. What you get is the 300 Hurst, an absurdly luxurious behemoth that wasn't just for cruising the boulevards, but for tearing them up too. Chrysler wasn't known for producing muscle cars in the traditional sense like Pontiac, Chevrolet, or Ford, but the 300 Hurst was Chrysler's bold attempt to bring the muscle car ethos into the full-size luxury car market. They teamed up with the legendary Hurst Performance to create this contradiction on wheels. The 300 Hurst was intended to combine the smooth, elegant ride of Chrysler's luxury sedans with the brute force of a muscle car. The result was a car that looked like it belonged to an aristocrat, but could smoke a GTO at a stoplight without breaking a sweat. Under the hood, Chrysler didn't hold back. The 440 V8 engine was a heavy hitter, producing 375 horsepower and 480 pound-feet of torque. This power plant was backed by a heavy-duty suspension system to keep the ride smooth, even while handling the beastly engine. But here's the thing, at 5,000 pounds, the 300 Hurst was never going to be a nimble contender in a corner. It wasn't built for finesse, it was built for straight-line speed and cruising in a straight line with the kind of smoothness only a full-size luxury sedan could offer. As you'd expect from a car with a Hurst badge, the 300 Hurst had some distinctive features. The fiberglass hood scoop, gold paint job, and Hurst shifter weren't just for show. They served as visual indicators of what this car was capable of, even though they were somewhat over the top. The luxurious interior, complete with rich leather upholstery and all the amenities you'd expect in a high-end car, only added to the confusion of the 300 Hurst's true identity. Was it a luxury cruiser? A muscle car? It was both, in an almost surreal, larger-than-life way. The car sat on a long wheelbase and had plenty of room inside, but when you pressed the gas, it was clear that the 300 Hurst wasn't just about comfort. One of the most intriguing aspects of the 300 Hurst was its sheer contradiction. It was big and luxurious, yet it could go toe-to-toe with the best muscle cars of the era. But because of its fines, it was never going to become a mainstream muscle car. It was too much car for many people's tastes, and Chrysler didn't produce enough of them to make it a true collector's item at first. Only about 500 units were built in 1970, making it a rare oddity even when it was new. The 300 Hurst sat in a strange position, too big for the muscle car crowd, but too fast and aggressive for the traditional luxury car crowd. And yet, the 300 Hurst has gone on to become one of the most interesting and unique muscle cars from the era, despite its eccentricity. It's like a throwback to a time when performance and luxury didn't have to make sense. when car manufacturers took bold risks to create something that didn't quite fit the mold. The 300 Hearst was not just a car, it was a statement. It was Chrysler telling the world that they could make a full-size luxury car that could put many muscle cars to shame while also being absurdly over the top. It was, in a way, an automotive experiment that could never be repeated. It was so big, so bold, and so different from anything else on the road that even today, the 300 Hearst still stands out in the muscle car world. It's like that rich uncle who suddenly decided to get into drag racing. You don't question it, you just buckle up and hang on for the ride. The 300 Hearst never became a massive success, but its boldness, its sheer audacity, and its unapologetic attitude give it a place in the annals of automotive history that can never be taken away. Collector's take. It's like your rich uncle got into drag racing. You don't question it, you just hang on. The 1970 Chrysler 300 Hearst may not have been the most practical muscle car on the market, but in the realm of automotive oddities, it holds a special place. It's a car that defies logic and embraces excess, and sometimes that's exactly what makes it so unforgettable. The 1969 Pontiac Executive 428, the Gentle Giant. At first glance, the 1969 Pontiac Executive 428 looks like a car more suited for a country club valet than a street brawler. Its full-size frame, plush interior, and sleek lines suggest luxury and comfort, not speed. But under the hood, Pontiac snuck in a 370 horsepower 428 V8 engine, making this giant of a car more capable of launching itself down the road than any sensible family sedan should be. The result? A gentle giant with a punch that most people never saw coming. Pontiac's Executive was, in a sense, the automotive equivalent of a heavyweight champion in a tuxedo. Its styling was calm, dignified, and refined, with chrome trim and a spacious cabin designed for comfort. It looked like a car your grandmother would drive to church, or the kind of car a chauffeur would have parked outside a mansion. But under the calm exterior lurked a 428 cubic inch V8, a powerhouse capable of turning this luxury sedan into an unexpectedly fast and aggressive muscle car. The 428 engine was part of Pontiac's long-running V8 family, and in the Executive, it was the epitome of hidden performance. This engine was no slouch. It offered 370 horsepower, enough to propel this massive car down the road with authority. But the sheer size of the Executive, combined with its softly sprung suspension and plush seating, made it feel more like a comfortable cruiser than a road warrior. Still, when you hit the throttle, the Executive surprised everyone with its brute force. On the road, the Executive was the automotive equivalent of a lion in sheep's clothing. It was surprisingly quick off the line, despite its size and weight. The 428 V8, with its ample torque and smooth delivery, gave the Executive the kind of acceleration that no one would expect from such a large sedan. Whether it was blasting down the highway or taking off from a stoplight, the Executive had the power to leave many muscle cars in its rearview mirror. And that was the beauty of it. The Executive was a car that didn't advertise its power. It was all about under-the-radar performance. Most people would see it and think it was a comfortable family car until they saw the taillights of this massive Pontiac as it roared off into the distance. It's the kind of car that could make a muscle car enthusiast scratch their head and ask, did that really just happen? For all of its surprise performance, the Pontiac Executive 428 never gained the kind of recognition it deserved. Pontiac had bigger names on its roster, the GTO, the Firebird, and the Trans Am. And the Executive, despite its power, got overshadowed. With its full-size frame, it didn't fit neatly into the muscle car market, but it was certainly fast enough to stand toe-to-toe with many of them. The Executive was more of a sleeper, a car that flew under the radar while still delivering thrills for the few who knew what it could do. In terms of performance, the 428 V8 offered the kind of torque that could send the Executive barreling down the road like a car half its size. It wasn't a refined sports car, but it didn't need to be. It had raw power, and that was all it needed to break the expectations of anyone who looked at it. On the highway, it could cruise in comfort with an effortless glide. But when it came time to push the pedal to the metal, the Executive was ready to respond with surprising speed and power. Unfortunately, the Executive never became a standout hit, mostly because it didn't fit neatly into the muscle car or full-size luxury sedan categories. It was too powerful for the luxury crowd and too sedate for the muscle car fans. As a result, it quietly faded into obscurity, overlooked by most. But for those who had the privilege of driving one, the Executive 428 remained a hidden gem, a giant with a surprisingly fierce side that nobody expected. Driver's quote: "It was like launching a sofa into orbit. Nobody expected it to move like that." The 1969 Pontiac Executive 428 will always be remembered as one of the more bizarre and underrated cars of its time. It was a full-size luxury sedan with the heart of a street brawler, quietly capable of shredding its competitors on the road. It didn't get the respect it deserved during its production run, but for those who did appreciate its power, the Executive 428 will always remain one of Pontiac's finest and most overlooked performers. In 1978, Dodge Magnum XC, the Disco Charger Imposter. The 1978 Dodge Magnum XC was a car that never quite knew what it wanted to be. With its bossy, bulky body and strange mix of muscle car cues and luxury appointments, it looked more like something out of a comic book than a real-world muscle machine. And yet, it carried with it a 400 V8 engine, NASCAR's love, and a legacy of cars like the Charger, albeit with a peculiar twist. By the time the Magnum XE hit the streets, muscle cars were already beginning their long, slow fade into history. The muscle car era was over, choked by rising insurance premiums, stricter emissions regulations, and the rising tide of fuel crises. In this era of diminishing horsepower and increasingly bulky designs, Dodge decided to create a car that had muscle car vibes but also catered to the growing demand for personal luxury and style. The result? The Magnum XE, a car that seemed out of place in both categories. At first glance, the Magnum XE looked like it had been designed with an eye toward bold, futuristic styling, with a wide, aggressive stance, bulky rear quarters, and those oddly out-of-place opera windows that suggested a touch of luxury. The body was so oversized and heavy that it made the Magnum feel like a land yacht in a time when muscle cars were supposed to be sleek and nimble. The Magnum's low roofline, bulging fenders, an odd mix of angular and curvaceous lines didn't help its cause either. It looked almost like a low-budget Batmobile, with a design language that couldn't decide if it was supposed to intimidate or impress. Yet under the hood, there was a hint of what the Magnum could have been. For those brave enough to opt for the optional 400 V8, the Magnum XE could still deliver some decent power. It wasn't a muscle car in the purest sense, but the engine was enough to give it a bit of a kick, making it capable of holding its own on the streets, if not in the races. However, the reality of driving a Magnum XE was more about cruising in style than any form of outright performance. It wasn't built to be the quickest or the most nimble, but rather a car that made a statement. The public, however, wasn't impressed. People had long moved on from the era of muscle cars, and by 1978, the Magnum XE felt like a relic of a bygone era. Dodge marketed the car as a performance vehicle, but it was hard to reconcile its bulky frame, luxurious touches, and disco-era styling with the aggressive performance of the Chargers and Roadrunners of the past. The Magnum XE was a muscle car wannabe, trying to hang on to a reputation it could no longer deliver on. And for most buyers, that was a tough sell. Despite its oddball looks, the Magnum XE found a niche in certain circles. NASCAR loved it. The car made appearances in the racing world, where it felt at home with its tough, muscular appearance, even if it wasn't exactly built for the track. But outside of the racing world, it was a tough sell to the average car buyer. The public had already shifted its interest toward more practical, fuel-efficient vehicles, leaving the Magnum XE to become just another quirky relic of the late 70s. Its design, at once extravagant and awkward, seemed to confuse rather than excite. For the few owners who embraced the Magnum XE, it became something of a cult classic. There was a certain pride in driving a car that turned heads, mostly because people were trying to figure out what exactly it was. And so as the Magnum rolled through the streets, the question often came up, what is that thing? To which the Magnum owner would reply, part Charger, part boat, all weird. It was a car that didn't fit in with the times, but also stood out because of it. The Magnum XC's reputation has only grown over time, now regarded as an oddball in the history of muscle and luxury cars. It was too late to be a true muscle car, too late to ride the wave of the 70s performance cars. But in its own way, it was part of the larger story of how the muscle car era died, transitioning into an era of more flamboyant, less performance-focused vehicles. The Magnum XC may not have been the car to carry the muscle car legacy forward, but it remains a curious chapter in Dodge's history, a quirky reminder of a time when the lines between performance and luxury were beginning to blur in strange ways. Magnum owner's quote, "People always asked what it was. I said, part Charger, part boat, all weird." The 1978 Dodge Magnum XC will always be remembered as the car that tried to bridge the muscle car and luxury sedan worlds, and ended up somewhere in between, a forgotten hero of a strange and uncertain time for automotive culture. 1974, Plymouth Duster 60, muscle on a budget, and LSD. The 1974 Plymouth Duster 60 was a car caught between two worlds, the shrinking era of classic muscle cars and the counterculture explosion of the early 70s. While muscle cars were beginning to lose their edge, manufacturers were still trying to capitalize on the power and performance of the previous decade. Just in a smaller, more affordable package. Enter the Duster 360, a compact muscle car that promised to deliver a taste of speed without the hefty price tag. On paper, the Duster 360 was a performer. Powered by a 360 cubic inch V8, it had the guts to deliver a satisfying punch. Plymouth marketed it as an affordable option for younger buyers who wanted the muscle car experience without getting slammed by insurance premiums. With around 245 horsepower, it wasn't quite a GTO or a Charger, but it was enough to make it a respectable contender in its class. It was a car that promised performance and fun without the stigma of being out of reach for most buyers. However, the Duster's charm wasn't all about speed or power. By 1974, the muscle car era had already begun its slow decline, and emissions regulations were starting to take their toll on performance. While the Duster still had the muscle to make you grin, it was getting harder for any car to maintain the same raw performance figures of the late 60s and early 70s. But what the Duster lacked in sheer muscle, it more than made up for with personality. And that's where the acid trip styling came in. The 1974 Duster 360 was far from a subtle beast. It came with a variety of bold, funky graphics, wild colors, and trim options that made it look like it was straight out of a psychedelic dream. From the vinyl roof choices to the two-tone color schemes, it was like a visual assault that screamed for attention. The stripes were thick and aggressive, the decals were everywhere, and the overall aesthetic was like something straight out of a tie-dye convention. It was like the muscle car scene collided with the counterculture movement, and the result was something no one had seen before. The Duster 360's colors alone were enough to turn heads. Bright oranges, greens, and yellows, all paired with graphic treatments that looked like something from a mind-bending trip. If the muscle car era was all about power and sleek design, the Duster 360 was about fun, without any of the seriousness. It wasn't trying to be a tough guy, it was the fun-loving, carefree sibling of the muscle car family, and its wild paint jobs and decals reflected that. If you wanted to race it, fine, but you could just as easily take it to a tie-dye convention and fit right in. Despite its quirky personality and fun factor, the Duster 360 never quite got the recognition it deserved. It was overshadowed by the bigger names of the muscle car world, and in the era of stricter emissions laws and rising insurance costs, it was harder for any muscle car to stay relevant. By the time it reached the market, the muscle car market was already in decline, and the Duster was often seen as a last-ditch attempt to hold onto a dying trend. But for those who embraced the Duster 360, it was a blast. It was cheap, it was fun, and it was a chance to experience muscle car performance without all the baggage that came with the bigger, more expensive models. It may not have had the reputation or the prestige of the GTOs and Mustangs of the world, but it had something better. An irreverent sense of fun that made it unforgettable for those who owned it. As for the 360 engine, it gave the Duster enough pep to take on most street races and make a few memories. Sure, it might not have won any drag strip championships, but it didn't need to. It was about the experience, the ride, the sound of that V8 rumbling beneath you, and the thrill of getting behind the wheel of a car that could easily be mistaken for a rolling piece of art. It wasn't just about performance, it was about the whole vibe. For all its wild looks and unique character, the 1974 Duster 360 remains a forgotten gem of the muscle car era. It wasn't the fastest, the most powerful, or the most famous, but it embodied the spirit of an era, a time when cars weren't just transportation. They were a way to express yourself, a reflection of the funky, freewheeling attitude of the 70s. Fan quote. You didn't know whether to race it or take it to a tie-dye convention. The Duster 360 may not have had the lasting impact of other muscle cars, but for those who lived in the moment, it was a perfect reflection of the fun, the caisson, and the absurdity that defined the era. In 1969, Ford Torino Talladega, the Aero Warrior, that time forgot. In the golden age of American muscle cars, Ford's quest for NASCAR supremacy led to one of the most fascinating, yet overlooked vehicles of the era, the spun 1969 Ford Torino Talladega. A car born for the racetrack but designed for the street, it combined aggressive engineering with an aerodynamic twist that made it an automotive enigma. Today, it's a rare gem in the muscle car world, remembered by a select few but largely forgotten by the masses. To truly understand this unique machine, one must step into the world of 1969, a time when aerodynamics was the secret weapon in the high-stakes game of NASCAR racing. Ford had a clear goal in 1969 to beat the competition, and in particular, Dodge and Plymouth, who had raised the stakes with the Dodge Daytona and Plymouth Superbird. Cars designed in specifically for NASCAR homologation with radical aero packages. Ford, never one to back down from a challenge, set out to create a car that could hold its own, something fast enough to challenge those aero-enhanced behemoths, but still street-worthy enough to captivate the public. Enter the Torino Talladega, a car built with the sole purpose of winning races, but also built to be a true road-going machine. To meet the homologation rules required by NASCAR, Ford took their already formidable Torino model and made several modifications that gave it a significant aerodynamic edge. The most noticeable change was the front end, which was radically smoothed and extended to reduce drag and improve airflow. The behind-you slope nose, while visually jarring for many, was designed with a singular goal in mind, to cut through the wind and provide a higher top speed on the racetrack. Ford also hid the windshield wipers under a special cowl to further streamline the car's body. The rear window was slightly altered, and subtle tweaks were made to the rest of the car's design to give it an unmistakably aero look, one that set it apart from the standard Torino models. It was a car that looked like it was built for the future, even though its innovations were driven by a single-minded focus on winning races in the present. Under the hood, the Convoy 28 Cobra Jet V8 provided the muscle to back up the car's high-tech appearance. The Cobra Jet engine was no slouch. It could produce up to 335 horsepower and delivered torque that could push the Torino Talladega to impressive speeds, even in its street form. This engine, paired with either a 4-speed manual transmission or a heavy-duty automatic, made the Talladega more than just a car with a weird nose. It was a serious performer. Yet, the Talladega wasn't just about power, it was about finesse. The car was engineered for the racetrack, but its modifications also made it a perfect candidate for the street, where it could surprise unsuspecting drivers at the light. However, while Ford was making strides on the racetrack, the public wasn't as receptive to the radical changes. The Talladega's appearance was undeniably strange. The long nose and sleek design gave it an almost otherworldly look, making it hard for many to accept it as anything more than an oddball version of the Torino. Despite its engineering brilliance, the car struggled to make an impact in the consumer market. People didn't quite know what to make of it. Was it a race car for the street? Was it just a weird version of the Torino? Most buyers didn't know, and that confusion led to limited sales. In total, only 750 Torino Talladegas were built for the 1969 model year, making it a rare sight on the road and a highly sought-after collector's item today. Despite its lack of commercial success, the Talladega's impact on the world of motorsports and American muscle cars cannot be understated. The car's aerodynamic design was ahead of its time and laid the foundation for future innovations in both NASCAR and production vehicles. Ford had effectively proven that they could build a car that could race with the best of them and look unlike anything else on the road while doing it. For many, the Torino Talladega remains a mystery. It wasn't widely advertised, and its oddball appearance kept it from becoming a mainstream success. But to those who understand the history of NASCAR and the importance of aerodynamics in motorsport, the Talladega stands as a testament to the engineering brilliance of Ford and their relentless pursuit of performance. It was a car that had the potential to dominate the tracks, but it also had the potential to be a star on the street. If only more people had understood what it truly was. Even today, when you see a Torino Talladega on the road or in a collection, it commands respect. It's not just another muscle car. It's a relic of a time when automakers pushed the limits of technology and design in the name of speed. It's a car that was born for a singular purpose, but ended up being so much more. 1973, Buick Century GS Stage 1, the quiet assassin. In the early 70s, the muscle car era was beginning to lose its edge. New emissions regulations, rising fuel prices, and insurance premiums had put an end to the golden age of high-performance, big-block V8 engines. However, in the midst of this shift, Buick quietly introduced one of the most underappreciated muscle cars of the time, the 1970 Buick Century GS Stage 1. But this car, with its unassuming appearance and unpretentious lineage, could outpace many of its flashier competitors, and it did so without drawing attention to itself. At first glance, the Buick Century GS Stage 1 seemed like a typical family sedan. It was part of Buick's mid-size Century lineup, which was known for its comfortable ride, spacious interior, and conservative styling. In fact, its design was understated to the point of being almost invisible in the muscle car scene, a time when style and appearance were key elements of performance cars. With its clean lines, cushioned ride, and unremarkable profile, the Century could easily be mistaken for a car meant to transport families to church on Sunday rather than a machine built to burn rubber. However, under the hood of this seemingly mild-mannered sedan was one of the most impressive powertrains of the era, a 455 cubic inch V8 engine. This big block engine produced a staggering 510 of torque at just 2,800 RPM, making the GS Stage 1 one of the most powerful cars on the road at the time. While its 245 horsepower rating may not have turned heads on paper, it was the torque that set it apart. The massive low-end grunt gave the car an effortless surge off the line, making it one of the quickest cars of its era. What really made the Buick Century GS Stage 1 so unique was its stealthy performance. With no dramatic spoilers, hood scoops, or racing stripes, it was the ultimate sleeper. On the outside, it looked like a regular family sedan, yet beneath that quiet exterior lay a car that could leave many of its flashier rivals in the dust. In a world where muscle cars were often defined by their loud, aggressive looks, the GS Stage 1's subtlety made it all the more impressive. When you pressed the gas pedal, the car came to life in a way that no one expected, outperforming many of the more obvious muscle cars of the day. The 1973 GS Stage 1 wasn't just a one-off performance model. It was a testament to Buick's ability to produce a car that didn't follow the typical trends of its time. As other automakers were cutting back on performance, Buick kept pushing the envelope with the Stage 1, offering a car that was just as fast and capable as its more celebrated muscle car competitors. Despite its understated appearance, it was a car that could easily gap Camaros and Mustangs at the stoplight, leaving their drivers surprised and wondering how they had been beaten by a car that looked like it belonged in a family driveway. Despite its impressive performance, the Buick Century GS Stage 1 never gained the recognition it deserved. The muscle car market was shifting rapidly, and the stage was being set for smaller, more efficient cars that would replace the big block V8s of the past. In this environment, the GS Stage 1 seemed like a relic of a bygone era, a car that embodied the last gasps of muscle car performance before the industry was forced to pivot toward a more fuel-conscious future. For most people, the GS Stage 1 was simply another unremarkable family sedan, a car that didn't stand out in a crowd. But for those who knew what to look for, it was a diamond in the rough, a car that could sneak up on anyone, both literally and figuratively. Its quiet demeanor and performance capabilities made it a true sleeper, the kind of car that could easily surprise its competition with no fanfare or spectacle. Owner's reflection: it looked like it should be parked at church, until I hit the gas. The 1973 Buick Century GS Stage 1 is one of those cars that was ahead of its time. Quiet, powerful, and unassuming. Today it remains one of the most overlooked muscle cars of the era, its legacy hidden behind a modest exterior that didn't hint at the performance lurking beneath the hood. It's a car that has largely been forgotten by the mainstream, but for those who have experienced its power, it holds a special place in automotive history. The GS Stage 1 proves that sometimes the greatest performances come not from the cars that are the loudest or most flamboyant, but from those that manage to do everything right without anyone noticing. 1974. Chevrolet Chevelle Malibu Classic Laguna, S3, the Brugum Racer. The 1974 Chevrolet Chevelle Malibu Classic Laguna. S3 stands as a testament to an automotive era teetering on the edge of change, where the muscle car's thunderous roar was fading into the background and the luxury sedans were steadily gaining ground. The muscle car's identity was becoming increasingly muddled by shifting consumer demands, the end of the performance-driven era, and the tightening grip of government regulations. Enter the Laguna S3, a strange amalgamation of performance aspirations and luxurious pretensions that never quite figured out what it wanted to be. It was a car that proudly wore its confusion on its sleeve, mixing sporty aesthetics with the cushiness of a Sunday cruiser. And yet, in its own quirky, conflicted way, it still managed to leave a mark on the American automotive landscape. Looking at the Laguna S3, one could easily mistake it for something of a hybrid, a mashup between a racing car and a luxury cruiser. Its front nose, made of urethane, was a direct homage to the modifications that Chevrolet had made for their NASCAR race cars. The focus on aerodynamics was clear, even if that aggressive front-end design didn't quite blend with the rest of the car's demeanor. But here's where things got really confusing. The Laguna S3 wasn't all business. It featured a Landau top, a distinctive luxury car styling feature meant to convey opulence and a smooth, comfortable ride, not speed or performance. Add in a set of flashy graphics and chrome trim, and the car quickly became a strange Frankenstein's monster of styles. The look was part performance, part luxury, but with no true sense of balance between the two. Beneath the odd exterior, the Laguna S3 still had some decent performance. It came equipped with a 350 cubic inch V8 engine, which was capable of delivering 245 horsepower. While that might not sound like much in comparison to the beasts of the previous decade, it was still a respectable figure for a car in 1974, especially one that wasn't fully dedicated to muscle car thrills. The engine wasn't going to tear up a drag strip or leave muscle car purists quaking in their boots, but it could get you down the road with reasonable acceleration and enough torque to keep things interesting. It wasn't the heart of a muscle car, but it was more than enough for everyday driving, especially when paired with a smooth, relaxed ride. Where the Laguna S3 failed to leave a lasting impact, however, was in its confusion of identity. It wasn't aggressive enough to fit in with the hard-hitting muscle cars of the late 60s and early 70s, nor was it luxurious enough to compete with the Cadillac and Lincoln sedans of the time. The interior, with its soft upholstery and plush finishes, seemed more suited for a relaxing cruise than for racing. Yet the exterior styling made you think it was ready to take on the road. The urethane nose, the bold stripes, and the sporty wheels hinted at a performance car. But all of this was betrayed by the larger-than-life body and the excessive, sometimes absurd, touches that made the car feel like an afterthought, pieced together by designers who didn't quite know what the car was meant to be. The public wasn't sure how to take it. The Laguna S3 was released in a time when performance was beginning to wane due to stricter emission standards, rising insurance premiums, and the economic pressures of the 1970s fuel crisis. The car's identity crisis, blending sporty performance features with luxury design elements, meant it didn't have a clear market. The muscle car crowd wasn't interested in the extra luxury touches, and the buyers looking for a plush ride weren't going to be excited by a car that appeared to have been inspired by racing heritage. The Laguna S3 quickly faded into obscurity as the era of performance cars began to close, and the public began to move toward more sensible, less flamboyant vehicles. In the end, the Laguna S3 was more an oddity than a standout. It tried to straddle two worlds, hoping to cater to both performance enthusiasts and buyers who wanted a comfortable, stylish ride. But in doing so, it ended up feeling like a jack-of-all-trades, master of none. It wasn't sporty enough to be a true muscle car, nor was it luxurious enough to be a full-fledged, high-end sedan. What it ended up being was a peculiar, one-off product from an automaker in transition, caught somewhere between the glory days of American muscle cars and the quieter, more practical vehicles of the 1980s. Driver's review: it didn't know if it was a racer or a recliner, so it did both. Today, the 1974 Chevrolet Chevelle Malibu Classic Laguna S3 remains an enigma, an odd and fleeting chapter in the decline of the muscle car era. It's a car that asks more questions than it answers. What was it trying to be? Who was it trying to please? But even as it failed to find its place in the automotive world, 1971, Pontiac Le Mans Sport T37, the GTO's secret twin. The early 1970s represented a fascinating crossroads for the muscle car world. While performance was still a central focus for many American automakers, looming emissions regulations, rising insurance premiums, and a shifting public perception about gas-guzzling engines meant that the days of the muscle car were numbered. Despite this, Pontiac, a manufacturer known for their high-performance vehicles, decided to carry the flame of muscle car performance forward, albeit in a quieter, more understated form. The result was the 1971 Pontiac Le Mans Sport T37, a car that, for all intents and purposes, could be seen as the GTO's stealthier, secretive twin. The T37 was a true muscle car with a 400 cubic inch V8 engine option that had plenty of grunt to satisfy any enthusiast's need for speed. But unlike the flashier GTO, the T37 was more of a sleeper, neither as bold nor as well known. While the GTO sported all the defining characteristics of the muscle car movement, aggressive styling, screaming engine options, and a pedigree that made it one of the most famous performance cars of the era, the T37 was a much subtler animal. It was a stripped-down, unassuming version of the Le Mans, with a no-nonsense approach to performance and little regard for the need to advertise its potential. Pontiac offered the T37 with a full range of performance options, including the 400 V8, which was capable of producing 330 horsepower and 430 lb of torque. With the T37's relatively lightweight, it was quick off the line and capable of leaving many other muscle cars in the dust. But the most notable thing about the T37 wasn't its power or even its performance. It was how unassuming it was in comparison to its muscle car counterparts. It didn't have the flashy GTO badges, the large hood scoops, or the aggressive styling that defined Pontiac's performance division. The T37, in essence, was a muscle car dressed in the body of a more regular vehicle, which made it a rare breed in the world of performance cars. Pontiac's marketing for the T37 was nearly non-existent. While the GTO was basking in the limelight with a well-established following, the T37 slipped under the radar, offered as a relatively low-cost alternative for those looking for the power of a muscle car without the flashiness and higher price tag of the more famous models. What Pontiac had created, quite cleverly, was a car that looked like any other Le Mans. It was a car that, on the surface, looked more like a family sedan than a street predator. The T37 didn't need to scream for attention. It simply had the muscle to back it up when it mattered most. The problem, of course, was that most people didn't know what it was. The T37 was a sleeper in the truest sense of the word. It wasn't a car that grabbed attention, and it wasn't one that could easily be identified as a performance model unless you were well-versed in Pontiac's more obscure offerings. And while that might have worked for some, it also meant that the T37's potential was often overlooked. Unlike the GTO, which had a loyal fan base and a recognizable reputation, the T37 was something of an enigma, a car that flew under the radar, waiting for the right person to appreciate what it had to offer. For the owners of the T, this lack of recognition was both a blessing and a curse. The blessing was that they could often surprise others with the car's blistering acceleration. Whether it was pulling up to a stoplight next to a Mustang, a Chevelle, or a GTO, the T-37 driver knew that under the hood was enough power to make quick work of most rivals. The downside, however, was the constant need to explain what it was. There was no GTO badge or identifying mark that screamed, "I'm a muscle car." So every time a fellow car enthusiast saw the T-37, it was a guessing game, leading to frequent questions, explanations, and disbelief from those who had no idea what they were looking at. I beat GTOs, Mustangs, and Chevelles, but I had to explain what it was every single time, recalled one T-37 owner. But for those who knew, it was all about the surprise. The T-37 had the kind of quiet confidence that was rare in the muscle car world, where flash and attention-grabbing style often took center stage. The T-37 didn't need to show off. It simply outperformed many of its more well-known counterparts with its pure muscle, stealthy design, and effortless power. It was the car that was happy to let its performance do the talking. Driving the T-37 was an experience that many owners described as an unspoken connection between man and machine. It wasn't flashy, but it was powerful. It wasn't loud in its appearance, but it was loud on the road. For those who knew what they were driving, the T-37 was a source of pride and a reminder that not all great cars needed to be celebrated with grand gestures and loud engines.